The anime starts with the end of a game after 3 long years, which is actually not enough time for the protagonist, a hardcore gamer from Japan, who's disappointed about the end of this game. He truly considers it trash and wants a game that takes at least 10 years to beat. Despite how disappointed he is, he wastes no time and immediately searches for a hardcore video game with garbage balancing. As soon as he types that in his browser, the screen displays the scenery of a mysterious world, and some unknown company offers him a game that never ends in a fantasy world of swords and magic. He's instantly interested in that, so he decides to look at the difficulty settings, which allows him to choose between easy, normal, and a strange new difficulty called Hell Mode. The description tells him that regret is the least of his worries, because he will be faced with utter despair. In Hell Mode, leveling up requires 100 times more experience than normal mode. He has heard that countless times before, so it doesn't intimidate him at all, and he decides to select that setting. There are a lot of character classes to choose from, like Swordsman, Spear User, Swordmaster, Hero, and even Demon Lord and others. However, the difficulty rating for Summoner class is higher than any other for some reason, and that catches his attention. It's also still in alpha testing, so he doesn't know how he's even able to select it, but he simply thinks that it seems like a fun challenge. That's why he decides to click on Start, accepting his fate as a guinea pig in this game. As soon as he clicks that option, he suddenly disappears, only leaving an empty room. The next thing he knows is that everything feels lukewarm all of a sudden, which is pretty relaxing, even if he doesn't understand anything. That sensation changes completely in just a few seconds, and the place he's in starts getting tight, making it difficult to breathe. Soon enough, he comes out into this new world as a newborn baby, and sees this as a literal take on the reincarnation trope. His father holds him happily after he's born, and when he sees that he's a boy, he tells him that he's already got his name picked out, which is Alan. Alan easily accepts his new name and new life, even though he used to be a 35-year-old, uneducated, broke, romantically inept, white-collar worker named Kenichi Yamada. Now he's been reincarnated as this little dude named Alan, and he's currently 1 year old. He can't talk just yet, but he has no problems thinking to himself or understanding words, so it seems like Japanese is the common tongue in this world. He's been born into a serf family, just like how he chose at the start, and this is a frontier village where pioneers pay tax to a ruling lord to cultivate the land, so it doesn't have a name yet. His father's name is Rodin, and he's a real family guy who works hard day after day. His mother's name is Teresia, and she's very pretty and as sweet as can be. He's their only kid right now, but since they're still young and so loving, he knows that it's only a matter of time before he gets siblings. Alan suddenly yawns, so Teresia decides to put him to sleep and leaves to have dinner with Rodin. However, as soon as he's finally left alone, Alan decides to try to open the stat window. Unfortunately, nothing happens, making him feel disappointed, because even if living the life of a baby seems awesome, he's supposed to be a summoner now, and he wishes he could do something with it. He's lost count of how many times he's tried, and he's slowly starting to lose hope. Alan decides to try one more time, just because, and this time, a bright light appears right above him, suddenly showing him a book. He clearly wasn't expecting that, so he can't hold back the scream that comes out of his throat. That immediately alarms his parents, who come running into the room to see if he's okay. Alan knows that he can't let them see the book, so he quickly makes it disappear and pretends to be asleep. His parents are clearly confused, but they assume that he was just talking in his sleep. Once they're finally gone, Alan sits up and decides to try again, making the book appear in front of him. After a whole year of trying, he can finally see what he was hoping for, and the book shows him his current stats. He's level 1 for now, and his class is Summoner, just as he expected. A page of the book shows him details on his summoning skill, so he learns that Summon and Create have their own skill experience apparently. He assumes that it means they level up the more he uses them, and for now, he has 0 experience of course. Despite this, he already has summons available for creation, though it's limited to insects and beasts right now. Alan notices that he can only access H-level insects and beasts for now, which is truly the bottom of the barrel. The book suddenly shows him another page with a message for him, thanking him for his patronage, and asking him if he's enjoying this isekai world. In the message, the god of creation also apologizes for the delay in delivering his grimoire. Alan simply assumes it's some kind of letter from the administrator, the said god of creation, who's apparently named Elmia. In the letter, Elmia also tells him that since he selected a class still under testing, it took time to finish the appropriate paperwork, and the staff worked hard to finish as soon as they could. Lastly, Elmia warns him that they don't accept any questions or cancellations in regards to class selection. Alan just knows that they still have some hiccups to work out for the summoner class, but he still wants to summon stuff, so he tries summoning an insect. At first, nothing happens at all, so he tries summoning an insect in several ways, getting a little impatient. There are no game FAQs or walkthroughs in this world, so he knows that he has to mess around and figure it out himself. That's when he thinks that he might have to use the Create skill first, and when he does, a card appears right in front of him. His first summoning is a H-rank insect card that has Endurance +1 and Agility +1, which is pretty basic, but he sees it as a great achievement. Alan excitedly tries to summon the insect from the card, but that's when his mother enters the room to check on him. He pretends to be asleep again, and decides to keep it quiet for now, and save the summoning for tomorrow. The next day, as soon as Teresia leaves him alone so he can take a nap, Alan doesn't waste any more time and tries to summon the insect. The card instantly transforms into a bunch of light particles, and they all gather to form a big grasshopper that jumps at his face. That startles him at first, but after observing the insect, Alan wonders if it will listen to his orders. He asks the insect to approach him, but it simply ignores him and leaves the room, which makes him think that it's just a dumb bug. Alan decides to check the grimoire to see if it can offer some help, and it shows him the grasshopper's stats. He apparently can pick its name as well, so he decides to name it Denka. The grimoire also displays a section for buffs, but he doesn't know what that means exactly. There, he sees that endurance and agility are +1, and soon enough, he realizes that it actually boosts his stats. Alan can't contain his excitement, so he accidentally raises his voice, and Teresia quickly enters the room to check on him. She instantly freaks out when she sees the giant bug in front of him, so she steps on the grasshopper without hesitation, getting rid of his first summoning. After several days of toying around with his skills, Alan eventually moved on to creating a rank H beast. He manages to create a rank H mouse named Mousy, which is as dumb as Denka, but they at least use their ability whenever he says so. It seems this world is crawling with a bunch of powerful monsters, but he knows that he can't beat any with his 2 summonings. He can stock up to 10 summon cards for each creature, and the most important thing is their buffs. For example, by stocking 10 of Mousy's cards, his attack stat goes up by 10. Now he packs enough punch to easily surpass what any regular baby can do. The experience required to level up skills and characters in Hell mode is 100 times the normal, so he still has a long way to go. Before he can continue with his summonings, his father comes back home after a long day of work, and Teresia instantly worries when she sees him covered in blood. Rodan quickly reassures her and explains that it's just blood from a hunt, so he's not hurt at all. Teresia is relieved to hear that, and Rodan excitedly tells Alan that he took down a boar today. Alan knows that his father is a serf, but when fall and winter roll around, he goes monster hunting with the other men of the village. Rodan tells him that it was a great boar, the humongous, and asks him if he wants to see it. Alan gets excited, because it will be his first look at a real monster, so he accepts without hesitation. Rodan carries him on his shoulders and tells him that the neighbors are carving it up now, so they can go check it out now. As Rodan walks, Alan also manages to take a good look at the outside world for the first time. His father shows him a flock of birds, saying that they're alba herons, birds that flock together and head north at this time of the year, signaling the coming of fall. After looking at that type of monster flying up in the sky, Rodan confesses that he named him after the alba heron and explains that for them, the sky is the limit. They can use their wings to fly wherever they want in the world, and that's true freedom. He really thinks that it sounds great, but Teresia totally bit his head off when he told her, and he knows that that's what he gets for naming him after a monster. Rodan continues walking after that, and Alan falls asleep in his arms, but when he opens his eyes again, he's surprised to see the great boar they defeated. His father lets him take a good look up close, and Alan thinks that it's terrifying, because he knows that he couldn't beat such a huge beast. A man named Gerda walks up to them and lets everyone know that today's heavyweight champion is here. All the men around applaud Rodan for hunting the great boar, though he dismisses it and says that he just got lucky. Gerda knows that he's just being humble, but he changes the subject and notices that he brought his son. Alan politely greets him and introduces himself, which takes Gerda off guard since he's only a year old. Gerda mentions that his daughter is the same age, but she's nowhere near this civilized. Alan decides to ask him if great boars are strong, and Gerda informs him that they're C-rank monsters. That means that it takes at least 20 guys just to take one down, so they're actually pretty strong. Alan makes sure to remember that information, because it at least gives him a benchmark. 10 months later, Alan is now almost 2 years old, and he has finally reached Summon Level 2 and Create Level 2. With this, he has obtained Expansion Level 1, and the Notes feature of the grimoire has been unlocked. Alan can already feel the gamer adrenaline rush, so he excitedly opens the stats page and sees that he can now create G-rank creature cards. He also gained a skill that fuses summons together, and his card inventory space has doubled, which means he gets double the buffs. Alan already wants to fuse some stuff together, but he doesn't have enough MP, so he decides to eat a lot to recover it. After dinner, he immediately heads to his room to try out this new skill, fusing 2 H-rank Mousy cards. Despite his excitement, nothing happens at all, and the grimoire informs him that he doesn't have enough MP, even though he recovered it to max. Alan then decides to just create a new summon card instead, and tries to create a G-rank beast card. However, he doesn't have enough MP to create a G-rank beast either, so he truly can't fuse or create anything new with his current max MP. By the time he's 3 years old, he already has several cards, including G-rank beasts and insects, and even birds. Alan decides to make a fusion of 2 of his cards, and that scores him a G-rank bird card, so he names it Chappie. When he summons it, the bird flies towards him and lands on his shoulder, so he takes a look at his stats, noticing that the bird has a voice mimic ability. He doesn't know what it means at first, until Chappie repeats his words and tone of voice perfectly. Alan thinks that it's really cool, because that might be good for tricking enemies. He then summons a frog named Hopper and a mole named Molly, 2 G-rank beasts. Alan asks Hopper to use their provoke ability, and the frog starts jumping, making their skin glow, which makes for a great distraction during battle. He then asks Molly to use dig, and the mole instantly starts digging a huge hole in the ground. Alan confirms that Molly could make a ton of pitfall traps, which can be very useful. He knows that the key to becoming a great summoner is knowing all about about the various stat buffs of his creatures. There's a lot of depth and complexity, so this is the hardcore gaming he wanted all along. Alan suddenly falls into the hole, and his excitement quickly dies down as he realizes that he's still not fighting monsters anytime soon. The bell rings when it's 3 o'clock, and he already knows what's coming, but he's not excited at all. Gerda's daughter, Krina, looks for him and excitedly invites him to play dueling knights, as always. Knowing that he has no choice, Alan comes out of the hole and greets his neighbor, Krina the Fierce. The little girl holds a wooden sword against him, and Alan accepts her challenge to a fair duel. Even though he plays along, this is the opposite of cool to him, and it makes him feel kind of embarrassed. However, he knows that he has to take these play fights with Krina seriously, because she's surprisingly fast and has no mercy when it comes to a sword duel. Alan poured all his creature buffs into agility, and he can barely keep up with her. Krina is so overpowered that she even breaks his wooden sword, but keeps attacking him anyway. By the end of the day, Alan's parents come to his rescue, though it's a little too late. Teresia is apparently already expecting another baby, which is not a surprise for anyone. Once Krina leaves, Alan gets up from the ground, and even after getting beat up by a little girl, he decides to help his mother and carries the vegetables in her hands. Teresia thanks him with a smile, and that night, as they're having dinner as a family, Alan tells his father that he wants to help them harvest the taters since his mother is pregnant. This clearly takes them by surprise, so Alan reassures them, saying that he's strong enough to do it. At any rate, it's safe to say that he has the stamina of a full-grown adult now, but he keeps that information to himself. Teresia tells him that kids like him shouldn't have to work, so he can just continue playing with Krina. Roden agrees, and tells him that he's already been helping them around the house. Alan tries to insist, but his father stands firm on his answer, saying that he'll end up doing it eventually, so he should enjoy life without farm work while he can. Just then, Alan understands that they're basically stuck in the serf class forever, and working the farms is on a different level from house chores. It's really grueling stuff, and he wouldn't wish that on his 3-year-old son either, so he decides to accept his parents' decision. They're both glad to know he understands, and Teresia mentions that she noticed he's been throwing rocks at the tree out back lately. Roden asks him why he's doing that, and Alan explains that he told him there are monsters in the forests outside the house, so he's going to protect his mother from them with rocks. Roden laughs and praises his son for being so brave, but deep down, Alan was just doing that to see if he could learn skills aside from summoning. Teresia smiles and asks him if he'll protect Krina as well, and Alan agrees, though all he can think of is how rough she is when they're playing knights. Roden mentions that they have so much fun playing knights, and he can't wait for his appraisal ceremony. Alan asks him what that is, so his mother explains that when he turns 5 years old, there is a divine ceremony to determine what kind of talent he has. Roden tells him that, with any luck, a good talent will help him break out of serfdom. Alan seems excited to hear that, and by the time winter arrives, he decides to check on Denka. It has been bouncing for so long in the same spot that it even created a hole in the ground. Now Alan knows that he can summon a creature for a whole day without any problems, which is big progress. He suddenly hears Krina's voice and immediately makes his grimoire disappear. Having no choice, he plays knights with her like they usually do, and she's as fierce as always. This time, he tries to match her pace and blocks her attacks, but Krina ends up beating him, like usual. Rodan comes back home after work, so Teresia comes out to greet him when Denka suddenly jumps at her leg, making her panic and fall. Rodan immediately runs to check on her, and even though it was only a little scare, Teresia starts having contractions, which makes it clear that the baby is coming. Krina quickly goes home to tell her mother, while Rodan and Alan prepare everything and take care of Teresia. Alan doesn't know what to do, and it makes him kind of wish that he had played a birthing sim about now. However, it's clear that his father is just as lost as him, even though this is the second time for him. Fortunately, Krina's mother Matilda arrives just in time to help like last time, but she asks all men to stay out, saying that the ladies will handle this. She kicks them out just like that, so they have to sleep outside while Matilda and her daughter help Teresia all night. At dawn, the baby boy is finally born, and Roden confidently names him Mash, though Teresia hopes that it's not another name he took from a monster. Alan can't help but wonder why he reincarnated, and even though he knows that all he wants is to max up his levels, this family stuff is pretty nice too. He's not exactly sure how he'll pull it off, but he wants to free all of his family from the drudgery of serfdom. Once Alan finally turns 5 years old, it's time for the appraisal ceremony, and he asks his father what it is like. Roden tells him that it's a special event that everyone from serf to noble has to participate in when they turn 5 years old. If he turns out to have a talent, then he might be able to rise out of serfdom, but the only catch is that he has a lot of rivals. After all, as soon as they settled this land, folks started having baby after baby, and there are a lot of kids about to be 5 years old, which includes him. Just as he says that, Krina greets Alan and asks him to go together to the appraisal ceremony, since she's the same age as him. Krina gets really excited as they approach the commoner village, and says that if they appraise her as a swordswoman, then she's going to be a knight. Alan notices some well-groomed people, and wonders if they're really commoners. He's surprised that they're all undergoing the ceremony at the same time, and he can tell that they're obviously dressed better than they are. Some people mention his looks as they walk, saying that he must be a serf because of his dark hair and eyes. 3 priests finally come out of the church before the ceremony starts, saying that Elmia, the god of creation, blesses all of them equally with great opportunity. This country has seen heroes whose lineage can even be traced back to serfdom. For example, Clasis the Saintess Class was a commoner by birth, and Diverg the Sword Lord was but a serf. Just then, Alan remembers that the game did say that classes like Hero and Sword Lord have to start from a low social class. Those were just configurations, but it apparently applies to the world as a whole, so it makes sense why everyone from top to bottom has to undergo the ceremony. Everyone heads inside for the appraisal ceremony, and Alan notices the statues of the gods worshipped in this world. He recognizes the one in the middle as Elmia, god of creation, the one who sent him a letter once. As soon as the appraisal ceremony starts, the priests say that they'll start with village chieftain Deboji's son, Palomas. They ask him to place his hand on the crystal ball and explain that any talent and attributes that he has will be inscribed on the metal plate behind him. The kid follows the instructions, and as soon as he places his hand on the crystal ball, his stats are inscribed on the metal plate. Alan notices that it's just like the stat page in his grimoire, and the kid apparently has the talent to be a merchant. That is great news for his father, who is really proud that his son is a merchant now. Alan realizes that having any talent is cause for celebration, apparently, and attributes get displayed with ranks instead of numbers. He checks the grimoire to confirm it, loving the fact that nobody but him can see it. As the ceremony goes on, Alan learns that not everybody gets a talent, and that's why it's something so important. A kid named Dagora steps forward and places his hand on the crystal ball, and the priests tell him that he has the talent of Axe User. Alan is just surprised, because that's the first A-rank attribute they've seen so far, and it seems like they can't get higher ranks without a talent. After almost everyone in the ceremony gets appraised, it's finally Krena's turn, and she excitedly runs to the crystal ball to know what her talent is. This time, the crystal ball suddenly starts glowing, and everyone's surprised to see the miracle in front of their eyes, because Krena has the talent of a sword lord, one of the best there is. Gerda excitedly tells his daughter that she hit the talent jackpot, but Krena is just disappointed, because she wanted to be a swordswoman. Alan, on the other hand, isn't surprised at all, because it's the only way to justify how ridiculously overpowered she is. Now it's finally his turn, and he's just glad that his parents will know that he's a summoner. As soon as he places a hand on the crystal ball, it glows brighter than ever, and even pushes him back. Roden immediately checks on him, but Alan tells him that Krena has put him through worse. He quickly stands up to see his talent, and Roden tells the priest that they don't know how to read, so it would be really helpful if he told them what Alan's talent is. The priest gladly accepts to tell them, but all their excitement dies as soon as he says that he has no talent. Alan knows that something must be wrong, so he immediately checks the metal plate himself to see what it says. That's when he realizes that the text segment where his talent should be only has a text glitch. That quickly gets him in a bad mood, and he blames the god of creation for it, saying that he should learn how to debug his game, because now nobody will know that he's a summoner. Even though he has no talent, Roden takes him back home, where his mother is waiting for him. During dinner, his father tells him that talents don't matter anyway, because he's always going to be their pride and joy. Teresia agrees, and Alan knows that they're so poor they don't even have a bathtub, but he's still happy he was born into this family, regardless, even though he's truly older than all of them. At night, he checks his grimoire and sees that all his attributes are E rank, and realizes that he learned at least one thing today, which is that he's the only one in this world playing on Hell mode. Everyone at the appraisal ceremony was 5 years old, which means they should all be level 1 like him. The rank system probably reflects the amount of growth that they can expect whenever they level up, so he assumes the reason all his attributes are E rank is that his progress in Hell mode is 100th of the norm, and when he takes that into account, his ranks must be showing the same fraction of their actual value. This would make normal people pull their hair out, but he's actually here to put weak sauce games in their place, so he'll spend his life proving that hardcore gaming is where it's at. However, that weird text at the appraisal ceremony was obviously a glitch, so the developers have to fix it. That's why he'll definitely complain, and he'll drown them in a sea of letters because they can't underestimate a gamer who has no life. Time passes by, and one day, Alan notices that his father is acting strange, but his mother tells him that he's been like that ever since he got home late last night. Soon later, they go to Gerda's house to celebrate the fact that Krena is a sword lord now. Krena excitedly tells Alan that sword lord is even better than swordswoman, so now she's going to get even stronger. Alan acts surprised, playing dumb as he says that she already tramples all over him because of how strong she is. Matilda mentions that the chieftain stopped by earlier and gifted them a bottle of celebratory liquor, so she'll let them crack it open. Rodin keeps a resentful attitude and congratulates them, saying that they can enjoy the booze. Gerda answers in the same way, saying that guests drink first in this house. Alan wonders if his father is jealous over the whole sword lord thing, but he knows that Rodin is not that petty, so it must be something else. Rodin tries to serve the first drink, but Gerda tells him that he's not drinking anything he pours with that sour look on his face. He asks him to quit being such a buzzkill about this, but Rodin suddenly slams the bottle on the floor and tells him that he's happy for him because Krena has an amazing talent, and that's cause for celebration. Gerda then asks him why he said he was cutting ties with their family, and that information shocks everyone. Rodin reminds him that he doesn't want to do it, but Krena's talent is extraordinary, so she can join the knighthood and serve the country. There's a good chance she can even become nobility, and people like that shouldn't waste their time socializing with serfs. Alan just then realizes that his father is trying to do them a favor they didn't ask for. Rodin insists, saying that Sword Lord is a big deal, but Gerda harshly tells him that that doesn't make a difference. Alan starts starts getting tired of their fight, so he tells Krina that she should make them settle down. Krina instantly grabs her wooden sword, ready to intervene, but before she can do anything, Matilda and Teresia take control of the situation. Once they finally calm down, Alan asks Matilda if they've always been like that. She tells him that fatherhood has helped them mellow out, but they used to be hotheads who threw punches at each other all the time. Teresia smiles as she remembers the old times and tells him that the four of them are actually childhood friends who grew up in the same village together. Matilda mentions that 10 years ago, word went around about settling a new village, and they decided to join that effort together. They also had a group discussion about working together to build their own houses, and that's why this house has the same design as theirs. Rodan explains that it was easier to just build both houses at the same time, given the labor and supplies needed. Gerda tells them that he's the one who put up the support beams, and Rodan reminds him that he's the one who built the walls and floors. Gerda continues, serving him some liquor and saying that he also did the roofs. Rodan mentions that he hasn't had any since his wedding day, and Gerda tells him that it's the same for him. Both Rodan and Gerda make peace after enjoying some good liquor, and the next day, while they're working, someone informs Gerda that the Order of Knights are coming to see Krina. Right after that, Rodan and Gerda head to the commoner village with their kids, and a lot of people gather around them to see Krina. Alan says that it seems like word about Krina being a sword lord is spreading already. Dagora suddenly approaches him, and Alan recognizes him as the kid from the appraisal ceremony. He can see that he's already flaunting his talent as AB axe user, though he's only carrying a big stick around. Dagora asks him what he's doing, saying that talentless losers have no place here. Before he can say anything, Krina immediately stands up to defend Alan, saying that he's here because he's strong. Dagora doesn't believe her, of course, and reminds her that all of Alan's ranks were E, and he's a serf. Krina tries to bite him, but her father quickly holds her back to control her. The village chieftain informs them that the Order of Knights has arrived, so everyone gets out of the way to let them through. Everyone recognizes the captain, a swordmaster named Xenof, and Krina is beyond excited to see real knights. It's been 3 years since she and Alan first started playing knights, and now she's meeting the real thing. Krina excitedly introduces herself to the knight captain, and Alan wonders if she will leave the village to become a knight now. Gerda quickly tells Xenof that his daughter is only 5 years old and hasn't even touched a real sword before, so she wouldn't stand a chance. Xenof doesn't see what the problem is, because she is still a sword lord in the end, unless he's afraid to admit that he lied, and this is some kind of trick to fool Baron Granville. Gerda nervously denies it, so Xenof asks the vice captain to proceed without letting him protest. Alan already can tell that something seems wrong, and Xenof warns them that falsifying the results of the appraisal ceremony is punishable by death, so they must determine whether Krina's talent as sword lord is legitimate. That's why they must now hold a fencing duel. Gerda asks him to have mercy, because his daughter's life is at stake here, but Xenof tells him that she must fight or they'll execute her and her family on the spot. Alan wasn't expecting something so extreme, and it's clear that it's not fair, so he wonders if these people just lost their minds. Everyone witnessing this is clearly tense and worried, but the moment Krina sees a real sword for the first time, she immediately runs towards it, asking if she can use it. Without hesitation, she takes the huge sword and excitedly challenges the vice captain of the knights to a duel. The vice captain introduces himself as Lebrant and accepts her challenge, easily blocking her first attack. Krina swings her sword without effort, and Dagora is shocked that she can use a sword that is nearly as tall as her. Alan knows that Krina's sword mastery skill should be about level 5 thanks to their daily play fighting, but he doesn't know how much that will actually help her. Lebrant finally decides to counterattack, and Krina barely blocks his sword with hers, making her father panic. She backs off and charges at him again, but Lebrant makes her crash against a wall with a strong kick. Gerda immediately loses it, but the knights hold him back so he can't intervene. Rodan and Alan also can't stand to watch this, so the knights have to hold them down as well. Alan is actually furious because this is obviously too much for a 5-year-old girl, and even if she's a sword lord, adults have the advantage in skill and level. Despite their concern, Krina stands back up even after that, and she now has an intense aura surrounding her. Even the vice captain of the knights feels threatened by that, so he quickly blocks her attacks. However, this time she's so strong that he can't even hold his ground, and realizes that this is an extra skill. Alan stares at the whole thing in awe until Krina finally gives the last blow, breaking Lebrant's sword in two. Just then, Xenof announces that the duel is over and asks them to lower their weapons. Krina is surprised that it ended so soon, but she still thanks Lebrant, telling that he's strong for a gramps. Lebrant tries to tell her that he's actually not that old, since he's only 24, but he gives up and falls defeated anyway. Everyone instantly cheers for Krina, saying that a little 5-year-old girl just beat the vice captain of the knights. Now they're more than sure that she's the real deal, a genuine sword lord. Gerda soon starts laughing in happiness, and he quickly runs to his daughter to hold her with pride. Rodan is just relieved to see she's okay, and Xenof knows that there's no way to refute this after seeing the state of Krina's sword after the duel. That's why he decides to commend Gerda on raising a sword lord, and apologizes for his boorishness. Gerda is clearly still angry about what happened, but Xenof insists, saying that his daughter has a marvelous talent, so he would like a chance to discuss her future with him. Gerda doesn't feel so sure about accepting his invitation, but Xenof tells him that he can bring his friends if it makes him more comfortable. That finally convinces Gerda, so they meet at the chieftain's residence to have a meal. However, Alan can tell that Gerda is still upset, and he can't truly blame him for that. He also gets why the captain and the chieftain's son are here, but he has no idea why Dagora and his father are. Alan assumes that he's just trying not to get overshadowed by the Sword Lord. That aside, he simply decides that he's going to sneak some of the Molmo fruit on the table home. Zenoff asks them to feel free to eat while he talks, and properly introduces himself as captain of the knights. He explains that he was sent here by the order of his lord to determine whether a true sword lord was among them, and the results are crystal clear. Zenoff tells Deboji that this frontier village was set to be named after him once it was fully established. However, now that they know a sword lord has been born here, his lord has declared that they should honor this momentous occasion by naming it Krana Village instead. Gerda is clearly shocked to hear that, and his grumpy expression disappears in an instant. Deboji gladly accepts, saying that he respects the Baron's decision. Zenoff apologizes for the change and tells him that 3 years back there was a sword lord born to the family of a count. Alan sneaks some fruit in his clothes, but he's surprised at that information because he's pretty sure sword lords can only be born in the serf, commoner, or baron social classes. Zenoff mentions that that particular individual went on to serve the royal family but failed to meet expectations. This led to a reappraisal, in which it was made clear their talent was that of an ordinary swordsman. Afterward, it was discovered numerous members of nobility had exaggerated their talents. Therefore, the kingdom has made it a point to thoroughly verify all results. Once again, he apologizes for putting Krina through such a harsh trial, and asks Gerda to continue to raise his daughter and help her flourish as a sword lord. When she reaches the age of 12, she can go study at the academy, and eventually serve directly under the royal family. Zenoff clarifies that at some point, an instructor will be dispatched to this village, so any kid with a talent must do their best to study and earn admission into the academy. Krina tells Alan that he has to study with them, but Dagora reminds her that he can't study himself out of a paper bag. They soon start fighting again, but that's when Zenoff finally notices Alan, and Roden tells him that he's his son. Gerda finally introduces him, and Zenoff immediately knows that he's Roden the boar hunter. He quickly stands up to pay proper respect to a village legend like him, and explains that the Baron is most fond of the great boar meat that is supplied by this village each winter. Zenoff asks him to consider this praise from the Baron himself, saying that he's a veritable hero for taking on the most dangerous role in the hunts. Roden shakes his hands to thank him, and once they leave, he admits that he's surprised even serfs like him can get recognized by the big shots. He tells Alan that he'll do great things as well, because he has his genes in him. Just then, Alan tells him that he snuck out some fruit for his mother and Mash, but his father lets him know that he did the exact same thing, which further proves his point. Time after that, Alan celebrates the fact that he could finally level up his summon skill. He immediately opens the stat page of his grimoire and sees that he now has the enhanced skill, which means he can make his summons stronger. He also unlocked F-rank creatures, which he expected, but he still has to fuse them together to get new ones, like he did with Chappie. Alan is excited to find out what type will be next, and he really wants it to be an intimidating dragon. What's even better, his card inventory went up from 20 to 30, and that means he'll get 1.5 more buffs. It's been 2 whole years since he last leveled up his summon skill, so he'll have to experiment later. At night, Alan offers himself to do the dishes, because Teresia is expecting another baby, and she has to rest. He actually just wants to get these chores out of the way so he can mess around with his new skill. Mash asks Teresia if he's going to have a little brother, but his father clarifies that it might be a brother or a sister. Teresia mentions that it kicks pretty softly, so she gets the feeling it will be a girl this time. Roden says that he has to start thinking up names, but Teresia reminds him that he promised that she gets to name any girls. As Teresia tries to think up a name, Alan notices that his MP is going back to full, so he checks his grimoire and sees a message from Elmea, the god of creation. He accidentally reads the name out loud, and that takes their parents by surprise. Rodan scolds him and warns him that they don't take the Lord's name in vain, and Teresia mentions that he's been acting strange all day. Alan quickly tries to play dumb and blames the developers' bad timing for this. He changes the topic entirely and tells his father that the scar on his arm looks better now. Rodan explains that it's because he passed a trial of the gods during today's boar hunt. It's a special moment that happens occasionally when they hunt, which makes them feel a sudden burst of energy that gets rid of all their wounds and exhaustion. Alan acts clueless and excited, but he assumes that that must be how they describe leveling up in this world. Roden's a battle-hardened veteran at boar hunting, and he can't see his stats, but he bets he must be a pretty high level by now. Even though his summon skill went up, he's still just level 1, and he's never going to gain any experience unless he beats some monsters. However, serfs can't leave the village without permission, and the only exception is for hunting. Alan decides to say that he wishes he could join a hunt, but his father immediately refuses, saying that hunting isn't a game, and it's so dangerous it can cost lives. Alan doesn't argue any further, and that night, he checks the grimoire again to read Elmia's message, though he already knows what it is about, because he sent some pretty toxic complaints already. Just as he expected, they finally fixed the glitchy text from the appraisal ceremony. The message also explains that his stats showing as E rank was due to the slower level ups in Hell mode, but they sent an attachment showing just the raw data. He decides to check that attachment right away and sees that he's S rank for MP and intelligence, which makes sense for a summoner. He has the same amount of S, A, B, and C rank ranks as Krina, so there's nothing to complain there, since it seems like good value for the effort. Leaving that aside, Alan doesn't waste any more time and decides to experiment. He starts by using Enhance on Denka, and the skill immediately boosts the stats of the creature itself, just like he figured. Apparently, enhancing creatures doesn't affect his buffs, and he decides to see it in person. Alan summons Denka, and he can tell it's boosted from how it looks, even though it's not any bigger. This proves there's more to Summoner than just bringing out the biggest and baddest monsters. He's pretty excited about the whole thing, but Teresia suddenly enters the room, and she immediately panics when she sees Denka. Before Alan can stop her, his mother steps on it without hesitation, thinking that it's just a giant bug. The next day, after going through a cycle of summoning and unsummoning, Alan learns that enhancements on a card don't go away, which means as long as he has the MP to spare, he should enhance all the cards in his inventory. He's been testing all the various combinations for fusion, but he still hasn't unlocked the new type. The only possibility left is to fuse an F-rank insect with an F-rank bird, so he hopes to strike gold this time. Alan actually manages to get the new type this way, and he gets a new card, but he doesn't look all too excited to see that it's a grass F. He didn't even know that grass was a summonable creature type, so he was expecting anything but that. He guesses it's not all that different from an insect type though, so he simply accepts it and decides to check the buffs. Alan is glad to see that he finally got a creature that comes with an MP buff, and having this buff means that he can do way more stuff over the course of one day. At his current pace, he doesn't know how many decades it could take for him to reach the next level, but this buff might cut that down by a number of years. He decides to see what it's capable of and summons the grass for the first time. An apple with arms and legs appears in front of him, so Alan doesn't give it much thought and decides to name it Appo. It's obviously not made for fighting, and Appo shows him that its ability is called Aroma. Alan asks Appo to use its skill, but the apple simply sinks into the ground, disappearing from his sight. Just then, a small plant emerges from the dirt, and it grows until it reaches his shoulders. Alan is a little confused, wondering if that's all it does, but he notices that it actually smells like an essential oil. Teresia approaches him to let him know that it's time for lunch, so Alan panics and asks Appo to go back to being a card. The plant remains in place, and he doesn't know how to get rid of it, but when Teresia sees it, she just mentions that it has a really nice aroma. Alan plays along, but he wonders what the deal with this plant is, and if it has any use outside of its buffs. After lunch, Krina visits him to play with swords, as usual, and Alan is quickly defeated, confirming once again that he can't compete with her. However, after winning the first match, Krina mentions that it feels like he got kind of tougher. Alan clearly wasn't expecting that, so he immediately checks his grimoire, seeing that his sword mastery skill is all the way at level 3. Plus, the expansion of his inventory gave him more space to buff his endurance and attack. Alan wonders if that aroma skill from earlier has any effect in battle as well, like giving boosts or something like that. Just then, he remembers that Fido was his first summon with an attack skill called Chomp. He really wants to try it out, but he shouldn't use it on people, so there's nothing he can do about it for now. Later that day, Alan continues throwing rocks at the three in the backyard, but he feels like he has thrown more than 20,000 of this at this point, and there's no sign of his skill leveling up. Mash tries to do the same as him, but he clearly doesn't understand the point and sees it as a boring game. Alan asks him to wait a little longer, even though he knows that he already has to look after Mash and help his mother with the chores since she's pregnant. Besides, he should really be focusing on increasing his summon level instead, and this just isn't worth the time it takes, so he might quit practicing his throw skill. However, he hates to think that he's just one toss away from leveling up, and that makes it impossible to quit. Before he can throw another rock, Mash asks him what the trees around the house are. Alan plays dumb and tells him that he doesn't know, but he can't ignore the fact that they practically have a garden now, and they're really taking up space. He figured out a few things out from testing, and it's mainly the fact that Appo's skill, Aroma, can shorten MP recovery time from 6 hours to 5 hours, which enables him to do even more daily activities. It still feels like he'll never have enough time though. That night, Alan mentions that his father is really late, and Teresia agrees, saying that Roden told her he would be working close by today, so he shouldn't be so late. They hear a commotion outside right then, so they quickly exit the house to see what it is. A group of men carry Roden's injured body under the rain, and Gerda tries to keep him conscious. Teresia panics, and they quickly take him inside, saying that he took a boar fang right to the gut. Alan notices that it looks like they straight up cauterized the wound, and Gerda explains that they managed to keep him alive thanks to a healing herb, a Mueller's a flower. Teresia asks him how they even got something so valuable, and Gerda tells her that, as part of their apology for what happened with Krina, the Knight Captain gave him some gold coins. They would have been screwed without those, and the other serfs blame the commoner who was with them for what happened. The loud complaints awaken Mash, who soon starts crying loudly, so the men decide to give them some space. Alan helps Mash calm down, and then asks Gerda what happened exactly, wanting to know if a commoner really is to blame. Gerda tells him that a few days ago, they got summons from the chieftain, who wanted them to let commoners join the boar hunt. Boar hunt is valuable to them, and even though the majority is given to the baron, the leftovers get split between the hunters. Of course, there are times they may trade it for salt, firewood, or other essentials, but it's hard to come by otherwise. In spite of that, no commoner has ever volunteered themselves for a hunt, and it's just too dangerous, since there are casualties every year. Serfs still do it anyway because it's how they make a living, and and they don't really have a choice in the matter. Alan asks him how the commoners ended up participating this time. In that case, Gerda tells him it's because they heard talk of a hero among the serfs, because Zenith called Rodan a legend in front of everybody. In a way of speaking, that became like an official endorsement, and everyone assumed commoners would be safe to join the hunt as long as Rodan was around. Neither Rodan nor he was comfortable with amateurs tagging along on the hunt, but they're not in a position to refuse orders from the chieftain. To make matters worse, in the days leading up to the hunt, there were slackers who wouldn't practice seriously because it probably felt like getting taught by serfs was below them. And then came today, the start of the hunt, and they gave the commoners the easiest job, holding the boar's attention. But when the time ultimately came, the commoners panicked at the sight of the great boar and threw their whole strategy out the window. One of the commoners tripped and fell, so Rodin stepped in to save him from the boar, but his stomach got pierced in the process. Fortunately, they managed to slay the boar, so he'll bring Rodin's share of meat tomorrow. Before leaving, Gerda asks Teresia and Alan to stay strong for Rodin because it'll take him a while to recover. Alan is left feeling like a loser because he hasn't even been trying to help. He decides to remain by Teresia's side all night, taking care of Rodin all the time. In the early morning, Rodin suddenly wakes up, agitated, so Teresia immediately hugs him, glad to see he's awake. Mash also runs to hug his father, and Alan simply observes them, wondering what he's been doing with himself. He's been totally preoccupied with powering himself up, but there isn't any good in power without purpose. This isn't a game for these people, and they're doing everything they can to survive in this harsh world. He has a little brother to protect, and another sibling on the way. Just then, Gerda comes back to bring Rodin's share of meat, as promised, and he's glad to see he's already awake. Rodin tells him that he's still in bad shape, but Gerda asks him not to worry, saying that they're going to make sure his family is well taken care of over the winter. Alan asks his father to rest up and let him take over, and promises that he will keep their family safe. Everyone's surprised by his determination, but Alan decides to prove his words with actions. He works around carrying heavy stuff, which highly surprises the other serfs. Alan has decided that it's time for him to drop the act, because this village already has an up-and-coming hero named Krina, so it's no problem even if a talentless serf like him draws a little attention. That's why he decided to pour every buff into his physical stats, so he ditched all of the MP ones, because family comes first. Teresia thanks him for bringing water, saying that it must have been really heavy to carry. Alan dismisses it and tells her that he's going to help harvest potatoes this afternoon, because Gerda said he would teach him how. Just as promised, Gerda teaches him how to harvest potatoes later that day, and Alan surprises him with his strength. Gerda admits that he's even stronger than he thought, and Alan assures him that he got it from his father. By the time they're done, Alan complains that the Baron gets dibs on more than half of the potatoes after all the work it took to harvest them. They're still going to need some other things to survive the winter, so being a serf surely is rough. Just then, the chieftain suddenly shows up with a fruit offering, saying that he heard that Rodan was back on the mend. Teresia politely thanks him for his generosity, and the commoner at fault for the incident quickly apologizes, saying that it was all his fault, so he hopes they can accept his sincerest apologies. Alan glares at him, because an apology isn't going to fix anything, but Rodan easily forgives him and asks him to be more careful next time if he wants to keep hunting. The commoner takes his advice to heart, and Alan is impressed to see how magnanimous his father is. On the other hand, Teresia remains firm and warns the commoner that his mistake nearly cost her husband his life. She reminds him that everyone has a family to go back to, no matter what their social class is, so he must keep that in mind. The commoner recognizes his mistake and accepts her words, but before he can say anything, the other serfs show up to see Rodan, and some of them even ask him to go on another hunt. They know it's still too soon for that though, so they let him know that their wives put together a care package for him. Teresia finally smiles and asks them to take it easy, because Rodan is still recovering. Alan is simply impressed, realizing that he has the best parents in all of Japan, or whatever this world is. He can't possibly stay behind, so the next day, Alan decides to create a vast area for himself to experiment. Once it is finally ready, he summons Hopper, and a bunch of colored frogs jump at his face one by one. For the second step, he sets up several traps and hides nearby, making sure he's not visible. Once this is done, Alan asks the frogs to use their provoke skill, and they start jumping around the traps while changing colors. Alan knows that this is the most cliché trap ever, but as long as it scores him about 50 ducks or wild birds, then his family can survive the winter. He patiently waits for his plan to work, but as the minutes pass, Alan starts thinking that the range of their skill is not wide enough because he hasn't even seen the first bird in the sky. After a while, Alan gives up and recognizes that this isn't working, so it's back to the drawing board for him. However, just as he says that, he's excited to see a wild bird incoming, so he prepares to activate the traps he set. Soon enough, Alan realizes that it's not a normal wild bird, but a dangerous albaheron. The monster starts eating the frogs, and Alan remains hidden because he didn't think that the provoke skill would lure a B-rank monster. That's the monster he was named after, but it looks pretty tough, so he knows that the best option is to run for it. Before he leaves, he sees that his enhanced skill is up to level 2 now, and that can boost creature stats from +10 to +20. He's already enhanced every summon in his inventory, so Alan figures that it's worth a shot. After all, he could help provide for his family, and besides, hardcore gamers never shy away from a challenge. Alan lunges at the bird with his wooden sword, but the albaheron quickly knocks him down. Without hesitation, Alan summons Fido, because this is finally his chance to use them in real battle. Unfortunately, the Alba Heron gets rid of every one of his summonings and hits him way harder than before. Just then, he realizes that he's been losing buffs from each summoned creature that gets defeated, and it's making him weaker. That's a major downside to being a summoner, so he starts thinking that this might be the end for him. Alan tries to think about a way to get out of this, and decides to summon a creature named Sucker. They immediately cling onto the Alba Heron, and fortunately, they manage to do some damage. Alan never tested it to be sure, but he was right about these guys having an energy drain attack. That allows him to get away from the Alba Heron's claws, and even though he's weaker after losing so many of his summons and their buffs, that's not a problem if he can just cripple this thing instead. Alan decides to summon more dogs and leeches to drain the Alba Heron's energy and do more damage with Fido's bites. Thanks to this, he manages to defeat the Alba Heron with a blow of his wooden sword. As soon as the Alba Heron falls, his grimoire lets him know that he has gained 100 experience points. Alan just then realizes that he actually won, and he finally defeated his first monster. That gives him a rush beyond words, and he doesn't hesitate to go inform his family, bringing the Alba Heron home with him. Everyone, including Gerda and Krina, are obviously surprised, and Teresia quickly asks him how he managed something like that. Alan explains that it happened to land nearby, so he took it by surprise, which is mostly true. Rodin mentions that he's got a cut on his cheek and asks him if he's hurt anywhere else. Alan tells him that the bleeding stopped already, so it's totally fine, and he didn't get hurt anywhere else. Gerda checks the Alba Heron's body up close, saying that this is really impressive, and asks him if he took it down with his wooden sword and some rocks. Alan confirms this, but that's when Gerda notices some dog-like bite marks on the Alba Heron. Not knowing what to say, Alan nervously explains that he was fighting on pure instinct, so maybe he bit it a couple times. That leaves Gerda completely speechless for a moment, but he quickly snaps out of it and tells Rodin that he'll bleed it out for him since he's still recovering. Rodin thanks him for the help, and that's when Alan notices a big lump on the back of Gerda's head, so he assumes he got that while playing knights with Krina. Alan laughs at the thought, but Gerda then asks him to lend him a hand with the job. Once they carry the Alba Heron's body somewhere else, Gerda tells him that Alba Herons weigh 60 kilos on average, but that drops to 20 kilos after they drain the blood and dry them out. Only half of that meat is edible though, and their wings fetch quite some money as well. Alan listens attentively, feeling happy that his neighbor is willing to teach him all this. Gerda also tells him that they still have to fork over most of it to the upper class, because the 60% tax even applies to wild monsters. They're nice enough to overlook smaller ones like E-rank horned rabbits, but Alba Herons are D-rank. Gerda takes a small gem out of the Alba Heron's body and explains that it's a magic stone. Magic stones from any monster above D-rank also fall under the tax, but it's not a big deal, because they're worthless to them in the village anyway. However, a kid like him wouldn't be out there catching monsters if his dad hadn't gotten hurt so bad, and they can use that as leverage to negotiate a bigger cut with the chieftain. Alan comes up with a great idea after hearing that, so he and Gerda go to the chieftain's residence together soon after. Gerda shows the Alba Heron to Deboji, saying that Rodin's youngster stuck his little neck out to take down this monster. The chieftain is more than pleased to see the Alba Heron, but that's when Gerda tells him that they'll fork over the entirety of its wings as tax, but he shouldn't mind them taking the rest. Deboji quickly protests, saying that that would be a problem because the Baron has asked that they deliver even more meat this year, and he surely understands what that means. Alan is a little surprised by that, but he quickly understands that that's why the chief was so insistent on having commoners join the hunt. Gerda tells him that they'll throw in the magic stone as well in that case, but Deboji still doesn't seem satisfied to have only the wings and the magic stone as tax. Before he can protest again, Gerda clarifies that if only somebody hadn't asked the impossible of them, then maybe their resident hero, Rodin, wouldn't have gotten hurt so badly. He mentions that now his poor family is on the verge of starving to death because of that, so he doesn't know how they'll survive the winter with 4 mouths to feed and 1 on the way. Alan quickly plays along and pulls out a perfect act, saying that he's really hungry and it's making him dizzy. Gerda dramatically asks him to hang in there and wonders just who they can blame for this awful predicament. Deboji quickly gets the hint, and he admits that he owes a lot to Rodin for his work, so they can have the rest of the Alba Heron this time. Alan thanks the chieftain, happy to know that their plan worked, and he asks him if they can keep the meat and just give him the wings and magic stones in the future as well. Deboji is a little taken off guard, but this is the real crux of the issue. So Gerda plays along and tells him that it's not good to count his Alba Herons before they've hatched, since they're really tough to get. The chieftain recognizes that they have a good point, so he allows them to have the meat if they're lucky enough to wrangle another one. After getting the deal they wanted, Alan returns to the village and sets up the same trap from before, using Hopper as a decoy to attract more Alba Herons. This time, he manages to catch 2 Alba Herons, and he makes Hopper disappear before they get hurt. Alan wastes no time and summons the leeches again to suck the Alba Heron's energy. He throws them off balance after throwing some rocks at their heads, and then summons Fido to attack the Alba Herons with the Fang skill. Thanks to this, the Alba Herons soon collapse with no energy left, and Alan uses the opportunity to hit them on the head with his wooden sword. He celebrates his victory and makes his summons return to his grimoire, completely unharmed. Alan has been hunting once every 3 days since beating that first one, but this is the first time he didn't lose any summons, so it's a flawless victory. The grimoire lets him know that he has gained 200 experience points for defeating 2 Alba Herons. His experience has reached the max of 1000 over 1000, so he also has gone up to level 2. Alan gets really excited and decides to check the stat page right away, realizing that he recovered all his HP and MP after leveling up. However, his stat increases are only 60% of the total they should be, so he's not getting the full benefits of the level up yet. Alan is still happy that he managed to level up, and he actually got some big gains on his general stats. 6 years after being reincarnated, he has finally hit his first level up, which is a huge achievement. This apparently is what it's like to pass a trial of the gods for everyone else, and it truly feels amazing. Alan decides that it might be time that he lets his family in on the truth, so he quickly returns home with the 2 Albaherons. Roden is clearly surprised that he beat them at the same time, and he notices something different about Alan, but decides not to mention it. When the bell rings, Alan knows that he has to go already, and soon after, he's playing knights with Krina. With today's hunt, he's met his goal of 10 monsters, and once he dries the meat, they'll have enough to make it through winter, so the only thing left now is to trade for firewood. Since there are a lot of Albaherons around for migration season, he could try to hit level 3 by hunting 20 more, but that'll be hard to do before the end of the year. As he thinks about that, Krina quickly disappears from his sight and manages to surprise him from behind, hitting him on the head with her wooden sword. She leaves satisfied after that, and at night, Alan decides to talk to his parents, confessing that he heard an oracle from God back when he was 1 year old. That clearly takes them by surprise, and Alan mentions that the god Elmea told him that he would bless him with power and wisdom. It basically means he's smarter and physically stronger than the average person. But at the same time, Elmea also told him that he'd be faced with trials beyond what even 100 men could accomplish, and he'd have to use his blessings of power and wisdom to overcome them. Both Roden and Teresia are shocked to hear that, since it sounds like something extremely hard for a kid like Alan. Roden then understands that Alan has bested one of those trials today, since the cut he had on his cheek this morning has disappeared. Alan only then realizes that it's true, and Roden tells him that he knows what it's like to pass a trial of the gods, so he figured that's what happened with him. Teresia asks him what happened to his results from last year's appraisal ceremony in that case. Alan explains that he got another oracle from Elmea about that a couple months ago. The reason his attributes were ranked so low at the appraisal ceremony is because they take the slower progression of his trials into account, and the reason he was judged not to have a talent is because his was actually too new to be recognized. Rodan is surprised to know that he does have a talent, so he quickly asks him what kind it is. Alan lies and tells him that Elmea never told him what it was, so he still doesn't know. Alan can't say anything about being a summoner yet, because he's worried some people might get the wrong idea if they find out he can summon and control creatures. And naturally, he also can't tell anybody that he was reincarnated. Teresia suddenly hugs him, saying that she wishes he would have told them sooner. That habit of throwing those rocks at trees every day and now hunting these big monsters, it's because he's been fighting to overcome the Lord's trial, all by himself. Alan apologizes and tells them that he wants to prove himself worthy by passing the trials, so he'll be brave and take them head on. Roden had already figured as much, but he reminds him that if he ever runs into trouble, he can always ask for their help. Alan thanks them both, and Roden tells him that they should keep this all between them for now, because it would be bad if anyone took him for a false prophet. Once that's clear, Roden mentions that he will tell Gerda at least, because he's always bragging about how Krina's a sword lord and all, and now he can tell him that his son is just as incredible. When winter comes, Alan works in drying the Albaheron meat, and Gerda now also knows the truth, though he always figured he was no ordinary kid. However, getting blessed and tested by God is something else, so he's still surprised, but it explains a lot. They both go to the city with the Albaheron meat, and this is Alan's first time trading for supplies. Gerda tells him that it's a good thing that he stocked up on those Albaheron, and Alan mentions that his boar hunt was fruitful as well. Gerda agrees, saying that things go smoothly when it's just serfs and no commoners to muck it up. Alan asks him what the real difference between serfs and commoners is anyway, and Gerda explains that it's their social standing for one. It's also their taxes, since the 60% rule doesn't apply to commoners, because they have what's called a head tax instead. They pay 3 gold coins for each adult and 1 for each kid every year. After hearing that, Alan decides to slip in his real question, asking him if there is any way for serfs to become commoners. Gerda tells him that he has to make a tribute of 10 gold coins per person in the family. He's also heard stories that the Baron can reward people with commoner status, but he doesn't know if that's true or not. Alan thinks about that for a moment, knowing that his family is about to get a new member, so it would cost them 50 gold coins to become commoners. Without wasting any time, they head to the first shop, and Gerda trades in 5 packs of boar jerky for some salt. Alan decides to do the same, trading in 5 packs of Albaheron jerky, which gets him a bag of salt. After completing his first trade, he follows Gerda around to get more supplies. 1 pack of jerky trades for 4 days worth of firewood, and now that he knows how bartering works, he can do a bit of market research next time he's in the city. A few days later, Alan decides to go to the city on his own to trade Albaheron meat for supplies. He later goes to a fruit stand and asks the merchant what the fruit hanging from the ceiling is, since it's the first time he sees it. The man tells him that they call those popos, and they trade 1 for 1 with a bundle of meat. Alan is taken off guard by how expensive that is, since it's 4 times the rate for molmos. After trading some meat for fruit, Alan walks around the city and takes notes of what he knows for now. A single bundle of Albaheron jerky trades for 1 bag of salt, 4 molmos olmo fruits, 1 popo fruit, and 4 days of firewood. The following forms of currency have the same value: 1 gold coin, 100 silver coins, 1,000 copper coins, and 10,000 iron coins. 1 bundle of jerky goes for 1 silver coin, so saving up for 50 gold coins would mean hunting 500 albahirons. That would take only a few years, which is a walk in the park for a hardcore gamer like him. Alan decides to go to a herbalist shop and asks if they have any medicine that recovers MP. The shopkeeper tells him that they don't carry anything that fancy around here, so Alan asks him where the healing medicines are. The man tells him that they're towards the back, and as soon as Alan sees them, he wonders if his notebook can make drawings too. He pulls out his grimoire and tries to think hard enough, imagining the shape of these herbs. That trick fortunately works pretty well, so he saves the drawing in his grimoire and asks the shopkeeper if he has the Müller's flour. The man tells him that he doesn't have any of those, and even if he did, he wouldn't cut any deals for it. Alan apologizes, and the shopkeeper confesses that he's still frustrated over the last one he sold. Alan asks him if he's talking about the one Gerda bought about a month ago, and the shopkeeper confirms it, saying that he burst in here all of a sudden and demanded his best medicine, being beyond insistent. He sold him a Müller's flour because he happened to have one in stock that day, but when he told him it cost 5 gold coins, he begged him to settle for 3 and promised to pay later. He kept hollering about some friend needing help, and he even dropped to his hands and knees. Alan is surprised that Gerda went so far to save Roden, which proves that he's a real friend. The shopkeeper mentions that the guy was more persistent than a kid at a candy store, so he had to let him have it, but he was biting his nails like crazy until he brought the money. It still was a bad deal, and he lost out in the end, so it really irks him. After hearing his frustration, Alan decides to give him a pack of albahiran jerky, and the man quickly apologizes for going off like that, since he's here to trade. Alan clarifies that he's just giving it to him as a gift, because he did a great service selling that Müller's flour at a discount, and it saved his father's life. This pack of jerky is only a token of his appreciation, and he'll bring more next time. The shopkeeper is really surprised by his gesture, and he asks him not to mention it. Alan thanks him once again before leaving, and then decides to go to see the cost of weapons. However, only a single weapon costs 50 silver coins, which is 5 whole albahirons. Dagora suddenly approaches him, asking him what he wants with his family's shop. Alan tries to dismiss him because he's not seeking trouble with him nor the chieftain's son. Before he can walk away though, Dagora suddenly punches him, saying that he only gets to pass if he agrees to be his minion. Alan then decides to draw his wooden sword and asks him to grab whatever weapon he wants to fight him. Dagora immediately leaves and returns with a bat, trying to hit Alan multiple times. Alan easily dodges him and recognizes that his attacks hit pretty hard, which makes sense for an axe user, but he hardly compares to the 3-star power of Krina. In no time, Alan manages to disarm him and leaves right after winning the duel. Some days later, at Krina's house, Dagora tries to fight him again, and this time, Alan tries to teach him a couple things. Meanwhile, Krina plays knights with Mash, and even though she's taking it easy on him, Mash is doing pretty good, and Alan thinks that he might have the talent of a spear user. Teresia already gave birth to her 3rd child, Mayola, so Alan decides to spend some time with his mother that night to see his new little sibling. Roden and Gerda get home later than usual that night, and they don't have very good news. Roden mentions that they were summoned by the chieftain, and he told them that he wants them to raise the number of boars that they deliver to the Baron from 10 to 15. And to make that happen, he expects them to let the commoners join the hunt again this year. They wanted to say no, of course, but this order came directly from the Baron, apparently. If they don't deliver 15 boars by winter this year, they're going to recruit more serfs from elsewhere. Alan knows that more serfs in the village results in less land to go around, which means that serfs who can't hunt might have their land taken away from them, and that risks changing the very nature of Krina village. Gerda mentions that they want them to hunt 20 boars next year, and the only way to make it happen is for them to hunt more often than the usual once every 10 days. That also means greater risks for everyone involved, but the opinions of a few serfs can't compete with the orders of the Baron. Alan decides to speak up, saying that if they increase the number of hunts, then they'll just keep expecting more from them over the years, until it soon becomes impossible. The ultimate result is still recruiting more serfs, so they should do what the chieftain says and let commoners join the hunt again. Gerda is clearly against this, but Alan reminds them that he has wisdom that was blessed to him by Elmia, so he hopes they let him handle all this because he knows how to make it work. Roden decides to give him an opportunity, so on the next hunt, he informs all serfs and commoners that they're adopting Alan's hunting strategy now, but he's only tagging along to watch. Alan actually was expecting to be part of the hunt, but his father is truly a hardhead, and he wouldn't budge. There's nothing he could do about that, but the important thing is that they train the newbies to help the group hunt more boars, because he doesn't want to see anybody get hurt like his father again. The commoner that caused that incident approaches Roden to apologize for what happened last year, and asks him not to cover for him if anything goes wrong today. Roden easily dismisses it, holding no grudge against him, and he simply asks him to focus on his role in the hunt. Soon after that, the hunting team exits the village, and this is the first time Alan gets to leave the village after 7 years living as a serf. It's a small step forward for him, and he can actually see the White Dragon Mountains in the distance. Every fall, the boars leave the foot of the mountains to come here in search of food, and legends say that a mythical white dragon lives somewhere near the summit. Alan quickly catches up with the group after fantasizing about about that, and he explains his hunting strategy to everyone. Roden just tells them that they must stick to what they practiced, and then asks everyone to go to their posts. Alan goes to a safe hiding spot, as promised, and when he sees the giant boar running towards the group, he realizes that it is truly terrifying, as they said. All the serfs dig their heels into the ground and manage to stop the boar with their spears. While they hold it back, Rodan and the other serfs attack the boar from the sides to drain its blood and do more damage. Alan observes the whole thing, understanding that the bait team lures the boar in, and then the tank team holds it in place while the strike team attacks its vitals. This is the method that his dad and the others have used to hunt successfully for over 10 years without any talents. Now that the boar has been weakened, Alan asks the commoners to get ready, since it's almost time for them to act. It was a mistake to count on weaklings like them to tank anything in the first place, so his strategy is to leave them at the end to finish off the boar. They should only need to attack it once to gain experience from the battle, and that will make them stronger. Once Roden gives them the order to strike, the commoners attack the boar with their spears, finally defeating it. As soon as the boar falls on the ground, the commoners can feel power flowing through them, which means they overcame a trial of the gods. Everything went just as Alan planned, because it sounds like they leveled up. Since boars are C-rank monsters, they must have gained a lot of experience, and it's easier for them to level up. Alan decides to check his grimoire to see how it went for himself, but he feels frustrated to find out that he didn't get anything, which means that it doesn't consider him part of the battle for just standing nearby. The commoners approach him to thank him, saying that his advice made all the difference. Despite being part of the reason they won, Alan feels like this is a victory laced with the bitter taste of defeat. Some days later, while Alan is fetching some water in the village, some neighbors ask him if he's going along on today's hunt as well. Alan confirms this, saying that he'll be there to watch as usual, though he'd really like it if his father let him wield a spear too. The villagers quickly turn down the idea, because Roden would beat them up for even suggesting something like that. His neighbor mentions that he's a little jealous, and he wishes that he could join the hunt too. The other serf asks him to put down his butcher's knife for once and join the hunt in that case, but the man clarifies that he can't do that because his wife's got a kid in her belly. He has to play it safe because of that, but he's always happy to have more monster meat to carve up. As soon as Alan hears that, he decides to ask him for a favor and shows him all the albaherons that need to get butchered. The man is clearly surprised to see so many, and Alan tells him that he was hoping he would butcher them for him because they're just too many for him to handle. He promises to give him 2 packs of meat for each one he takes care of, and the man is more than pleased with that offer. These albaherons aren't part of the family's food reserves, so Alan needs him to break down the carcasses so he can sell the meat. After all, he has to use something to earn those 50 gold coins to get his family out of serfdom. It would cost extra to have a butcher in town to do it anyway, so it's better to just outsource the job here, which also means fewer trips overall. On the next hunt, there are more commoners joining the team, following Alan's strategy. Alan knows that by gradually adding new people to the team, they'll eventually have enough to make 2 groups, and that should double the amount of boars they can hunt. He wishes he knew why the Baron was so hung up on having more boars though, since he doesn't get the impression his territory is suffering from food shortages. Soon enough, the bait team attracts another boar, and the tank team holds it back with their spears. The strike team weakens it again by attacking it from the sides, and that's when Gerda asks the newbies to do their part. All of them attack the boar with their spears, and they soon take it down, which makes them feel like they have overcome another trial of the gods. Alan quickly checks his grimoire after the boar falls and sees that his plan has worked because all his stats have gone up, and he even leveled up. Just before the fight, while the boar was running towards the tank team, he summoned Denka right in its path. His creatures can be summoned to any location that he can mark by sight within a 50-meter radius. Since Denka was in the way, the boar stepped on it, and that was enough for Alan's plan to work out. After all, as long as the boar attacks one of his creatures, it's enough to count him as a participant in the battle. 3 months later, Alan mentions that this world apparently shares the custom of celebrating the start of the new year, which led to him being invited to the chieftain's residence for the first time. He returns to the village after that with Krena, who's really happy that they got candies and some gifts to take home. Alan assumes that this is supposed to be the reward for successfully meeting the 15 boar quota, so he can't complain at all. Once they're home, their families are already waiting for them to have dinner all together. Alan tells Roden and Gerda that they had a good time at the chieftain's residence, and they should have gone with them. Gerda mentions that sitting through all that pomp and circumstance is a boring way to start the new year. That aside, they decide to get the party started and enjoy the feast together as a family. Gerda asks him if the chieftain said anything about them, and Alan mentions that he was really appreciative. Rodin tells them that given how things are going, they shouldn't have a problem meeting the quota of 20 boars this year, and it is all thanks to Alan and his plan to train the newbies. Gerda then notices a seemingly special bottle behind Alan, so he decides to ask him about it. Alan explains that the chieftain gave it to him as a gift, and it's a bottle of liquor. Both Rodin and Gerda get excited almost instantly, easily taking the bait, so Alan decides to reel them in. He excitedly asks Mash if he wants to do more spear training soon, and his little brother agrees. Krena says that she wants to train as well, but Alan tells her that she's already strong enough, and they have to nurture Mash because he has the makings of a spear user. Despite the sudden change in topic, Rodin and Gerda are still thinking about that liquor he has. Alan reminds them that it was a gift the chieftain gave him, but Gerda asks him not to be silly because everybody knows that he's not even old enough to drink it. Once it gets to that point, Alan proceeds with his plan and tells them that he'll let them have it, but only if they beat him in a contest. Roden hesitates, but Gerda accepts without thinking, feeling confident that they can win against him alone. Alan then asks them what he'll get from them if he wins, and that takes them off guard, so they just ask him to tell them what he wants. Without a doubt, Alan says that if he wins the contest, they'll have to let him wield a spear during all the boar hunts this year. Both Roden and Gerda realize right then that they walked right into Alan's trap, which reminds them just how smart he truly is. Roden decides to accept either way, saying that if they win, they'll get the liquor, and if he wins, he can fight in the boar hunts. Gerda asks him what kind of contest he had in mind, and Alan tells them that it'll be arm wrestling, of course. That quickly makes them feel more confident, and Gerda decides to be the first up against Alan, saying that he won't go easy on him. Alan is completely prepared because he stocked his inventory full of Fido cards just for this, and buffs into attack power. Not to mention, he's level 6 now, so he's pretty sure he's got this in the bag already. Thanks to that, Alan manages to win against Gerda, though from what he can tell, Gerda's attack stat must be somewhere between 150 and 200. Despite how well that went, when it's Roden's turn, Alan can't keep up with his strength, and he ends up losing in the end. Alan accepts his defeat, realizing that his father's attack stat has to be over 300 at least. While they enjoy the liquor bottle, Alan analyzes their strength, and since Gerda's attack stat is around D rank, his father's is more like C rank. That at least gives him a reference for how strong the people playing on normal mode can get. Roden tells him that he's not weak by any means despite losing, but he's not hunting any boars until he has what it takes to beat him. Alan decides to hold him to that because he stands a decent shot of making that happen if he can get to summon level 4 before fall. By June, Alan's summon level finally goes up again, and the grimoire gives him a lot of new information. He quickly checks his stats page and finds out that he has unlocked E-rank summon creatures, and even a new type. It seems like he has to fuse them together again to find out what kind it is exactly, but he has plenty of MP to spare this time, so he can experiment freely. His card inventory went up by 10 as well, and the amount of buffs that summon creatures provide scale by their level, so he should get a significant boost if he fills his inventory with 40 E-rank cards. That means he can totally beat his father at arm wrestling now, so he'll be able to participate in hunts soon. Alan then notices a new skill called storage in his grimoire, and he doesn't understand what it is at first, until he sees a hole in one of the pages. He tries to put a stick inside, and realizes that it's actually pretty deep, since it really has no bottom. Alan soon finds out that he can call up a mental image of the items he has stored inside. He decides to experiment and throws a bunch of stuff in, learning that he can put anything in this hole as long as it fits, and there are no limits on the amount either. Something about that feels wrong to him, because one major aspect of games is how many items the player can hold. He doesn't understand why they're giving him a god-tier storage skill at this particular point in time. Whether it's a key, a boat, or a magic carpet, items are usually obtained around the time they become necessary, because that's how the developers design it, of course. That's why there must be a reason behind this, something that makes it necessary to have right now. Leaving that aside for now, Alan decides that it's time to play around with the E-rank summons. For some reason, nothing happens when he tries to create a rank E insect, which makes him think that he doesn't have enough MP. The grimoire informs him that he doesn't have enough E-rank magic stones to create a rank E insect. Alan didn't even know that was a thing, and he's surprised that creating E ranks requires items now. He decides to sneak into his room without waking his little brother up, and gets the bag with all the money he's earned lately. Alan kept some magic stones from the horned rabbits that wandered into the village, so he uses some to create a rank E insect. It doesn't work at first until he puts the magic stones in his storage and manages to create what he wanted. By the looks of it, it seems like the E rank insect is a butterfly, but when he decides to summon it, it's clearly bigger than he expected. As always, Teresia shows up at the worst possible moment, so he panics and asks the butterfly to hide. The insect quickly hides behind his back, so Alan tries to play it cool and gives his mother an excuse. After Teresia leaves, Alan continues trying his new summons, and one of them is a rank E beast, a saber-toothed tiger. It seems bigger and tougher than his dog summon, and its buffs increase his stats by 10 too, which is double what the F ranks do. He decides to name it Tama and welcomes it to the team before making it go back to the grimoire. Now that Alan is away from home, he decides to try to do some fusions, wanting to get a rank E bird. He manages to get it after throwing some magic stones in his storage, and that alone lets him know that he's going to need plenty from now on. However, that night, his father tells him that horned rabbits shouldn't be coming around anymore, because they made a ditch around the whole village a couple years back. Even small monsters like those can be dangerous to kids, and that's why they decided to do it. Alan finds himself in a difficult position now, because he doesn't know how he can get more magic stones without any rabbits. One day, while Krina is playing knights with Dagora, Alan decides to talk to Palomas, and asks him what he knows about magic stones, since he heard that he's pretty smart. Palomas tells him that they're small gems that are embedded in monsters close to their hearts, and they're mostly used to power magic tools. Magic tools are items that activate when used with magic stones, and they have many different types of them in the royal capital. D and C rank stones can be useful for people in the capital, but E rank stones are basically just trash, so he can usually find them lying lying on the ground. To prove this, Palomas walks for a bit and finds an E-rank magic stone on the ground. Alan thanks him for the information and the magic stone, and he now knows that he'll need to scavenge around the village for them. He decides to call in backup though, and after a while, he manages to gather a bunch of magic stones thanks to the help from some villagers. He's created all of the E-rank summons available because of that, so it's now time to find out what kind of abilities they have. Before he can do that though, one of his new summons, Hawkins, flies straight towards him and warns him about something dangerous coming. Alan can barely react before a boar jumps right over him, making him fall and get hurt. Another one of his summons, Beansy, quickly approaches him and uses its ability to heal his wounds. The boar charges at him again, but the butterfly, Papillon, uses its ability to stun the boar, and that's when Alan asks Tama to attack. The tiger manages to do a lot of damage, and that alone manages to take down the boar in no time. Alan doesn't have much time to cheer, because another angry boar appears out of nowhere. It runs straight towards him, giving him no time to react, but another one of his summons, a rock named Wally, steps in right in time and acts as a shield. The boar runs straight into the sturdy wall and immediately collapses after that strong impact. Alan is relieved, but as soon as he blinks, everything around him is gone, making him think that he just hallucinated all that. He decides not to give it much thought, knowing that for these past 7 years, he's been considering exactly how a summoner is supposed to play. He could read a game FAQ or walkthrough for any other game, but that isn't an option here. That's why he has to figure out how to tap into a summoner's full potential all by himself. At this point, he's convinced that each summon type is designed to fulfill a specific role in battle. Insect types are for applying debuffs, beast types are for offense, birds are for gathering and relaying intel, grass types are for healing, and stone types are for defense. All of these things enable him to fulfill every role of a typical party by himself, and that's what makes a summoner good. It also helps explain why he got the storage skill at this specific moment, because he couldn't walk around with hundreds of magic stones on him otherwise. Now Alan understands what the developers were going for, and he has an unrivaled army of creatures at his disposal that can overcome any situation and rout any enemy. It's the ultimate power that makes the summoner stronger than even the demon lord. Soon after that, the chieftain informs Gerda and Rodin that from what he's been told, the Baron himself will be paying them a visit next month. That's because he has expressed interest in observing their boar hunts firsthand. Gerda doesn't seem very pleased by this, because the surprises never stop. First he wants more boars, and now he also wants a show. Rodin clarifies that that's fine with him, but he wants to know why he asked Alan to join them. The chieftain explains that they need someone to serve as a tour guide for the Baron during his stay. Gerda is clearly against this and asks him why he doesn't have his own son do it instead. Deboji tells him that his son Palomas isn't suited to the task, so he's hoping Alan can help them show the Baron hospitality starting with dinner the night before the hunt. Alan understands that he basically wants him to entertain the Baron while he's in town, and he's trying to win him over with these molmo fruits he's eating right now. Unfortunately for him, Alan is not so cheap, and he isn't going to agree so easily. The chieftain mentions that he's heard it was Alan's clever ideas that led to the success of their hunts last year, so he's sure he can handle this important job. When Deboji asks him for an answer, Alan can't help but think that he couldn't care less about the Baron at all. However, he knows that he won't get any chances to leave the village as a serf, and it will take 10 years of hunting boars and albaherons before he can reach commoner status. Rodin notices his hesitation and tells him that he can refuse if he wants. Just then, Alan remembers that there was one more ticket to rising the social ladder, because the Baron can gift people with commoner status. That's why he decides to accept being the Baron's tour guide during the boar hunt. A month later, Baron Granville finally arrives, and Deboji nervously welcomes him, saying that they're honored to have him. Granville thanks him for the warm welcome, and soon enough, his daughter, Cecil, comes out of the carriage. They all head to the chieftain's residence for dinner, and Granville tells Deboji that he appreciates the work that he's put in over the years to establish Krina village. It's been 15 years since the land reclamation decree, and there has been no greater success than here in the Granville fiefdom. Deboji thanks him for the praise, and the Baron also apologizes for all the fuss over boar meat. He knew asking for more would burden him unduly, but he simply couldn't refuse an order from the king. Deboji is shocked that the order comes directly from the king, but Granville clarifies that the blame truly lies with Viscount Carnell. The Baron suddenly can't contain his anger as he talks about it, saying that that scoundrel was calling attention to the boar hunts while he was in front of the king. Granville's butler tries to make him calm down, saying that his tone is frightening the chieftain. Once he calms down, the Baron enjoys the dinner they prepared for them, and he's gladly surprised by how exquisite the food is. His daughter Cecil agrees, saying that the meat is quite delicious, more than she was expecting. Granville asks them what kind of meat this is, but Deboji isn't very sure himself, so Alan decides to speak up and informs them that this is a dish of albaheron. He mentions that the meat is from one hunted just yesterday because they used only the freshest ingredients for the Baron. Alan explains that it uses breast meat, thigh meat, and liver, all flavored with a blend of herbs. The Baron is quite pleased by his explanation and assumes that he's the chieftain's son, but Deboji clarifies that he's actually the son of Rodin. Xenov quickly remembers Rodin, the boar hunter, and remembers why Alan's black hair and eyes seem familiar. Alan politely greets him and mentions that he will be serving as their guide during tomorrow's hunt. Granville admits that he's such a well-mannered young man and asks Deboji Deboji if his father is a former member of the knighthood. Deboji quickly clarifies that he comes from a family of serfs, but Granville's daughter seems outraged by this, wondering how they can let one of them into their guest hall. Granville instantly scolds Cecil and reminds her that serfs are fair members of their fiefdom, so she can't just treat them like they're some kind of animal. Cecil apologizes, but she continues glaring at Alan like he's her sworn enemy, even though he didn't do anything to deserve it. That aside, Xenoph tells him that he hopes he's ready to acquaint them on the finer details during tomorrow's hunt. He mentions that wrangling 20 boars in 1 year is a steep goal, but if it proves too difficult, then his knights will take over the hunts. Alan quickly gets defensive and assumes that Xenoph isn't convinced that the serfs have what it takes. Cecil tells Xenoph that that would be most wonderful, and mentions that she asked her father to let her tag along because she wanted to see a great boar up close, but seeing the knights slay one would be even better. The Baron doesn't seem to be against this, so he tells Alan that once he's shown them the fundamentals, the knights can handle the responsibility of hunting. Alan politely declines the idea and clarifies that 20 boars is a paltry number, so they will have no problems meeting the quota, and their performance tomorrow should convince him of that. He leaves everyone at the table speechless with that, and the next day, they finally prepare to see the boar hunt. Granvelle tells Xenoph that he's leaving Cecil under his protection, so he expects him to keep her safe while they observe the hunt. Once they get to the hunting grounds, Alan informs them that they'll be able to see all of today's action from atop the watchtower they built just for them. After they climb the watchtower, Alan tells them that this is the forest where the great boars nest. The hunters finally arrive, and Xenoph instantly notices that they've got armor now. Alan explains that they made good use of the boars from last year, and that armor was forged from leftover pelts, bones, and fangs. He informs the Baron that he was asked to thank him for granting permission for that on behalf of his father, Rodan. Once the hunt finally begins, the bait team runs into the forest, and Alan explains that their job is to lure boars into the hunting grounds. Speed is a key factor for them, which is why they are only lightly equipped, unlike the other hunters. Both Granvelle and Cecil wait for something to happen, but Alan asks them to be patient, as it may take time to lure the boars, despite how many live in the forest. While they wait, Xenoph decides to ask him how the Sword Lord Krina is faring these days. Alan confidently tells him that she's doing great, and Xenoph is pleased to hear this. He also asks him to let her know a tutor will be dispatched here the spring after next to help her study for the academy entrance exam. Alan gladly accepts to inform her, but deep down, it's hard for him to imagine Krina studying for anything. The thought alone makes him laugh, because he's sure she's going to look really silly. Before he can think about it further, the bait team finally comes back, luring the first great boar into the hunting grounds. Alan explains that they start by boxing the boars in, with large shields made from 2 layers of the toughest part of the boar hide, found on its back. The strike team comes in after that, and then the long spear team is called into action. The long spear team consists of the least experienced members, who just joined last year. Xenoph easily understands that the frontliners with the toughest job are the ones wearing armor. Alan mentions that the armor also covers their backs to prevent injuries if one of the long spear team misses the target. Cecil starts feeling a little nauseous as she sees the boar getting stabbed by the long spears. Alan then says that the boar's neck is the best place to strike, and just then, Rodan finishes the boar with a fatal blow, making Cecil faint in her seat. All the hunters celebrate after the boar goes down, while the butler, Sibas, tries to bring Cecil back to her senses. Xenoph tells Granvelle that these men may not be knights, but he believes that they are worthy of being called warriors. Granvelle agrees, and admits that he must applaud their fighting prowess, so it seems there will be no problem with reaching the boar quota. As soon as he says that, the bait team suddenly runs into the hunting grounds, getting chased by 2 great boars. Xenoph is a little concerned to see they're facing 2 boars at once, so he asks Lebrun to make ready to assist. Alan quickly asks him to wait, saying that there is no need to panic because the hunting team is trained to deal with these situations. Rodan immediately gives the order to split into 2 groups and to stick to their training. Alan is sure that every hunter worth their salt knows to kill all the game they bait, and letting anything escape is folly. However, for the past 10 years, his father and the other serfs haven't been able to do that, mainly due to their lack of armor. 60% of their hard-earned boar meat gets taken as tax, and they have to exchange the rest for daily necessities. Spears were the only thing they could afford to upgrade, but it's possible for them to create some leeway by mastering the most efficient hunting strategy. That allows for gradual equipment upgrades, which then raises their efficiency even higher. Cecil comes back to her senses for a moment, but as soon as she sees Rodan striking another boar on its neck, she passes out right away again. The hunting team manages to take down 3 boars in no time just like that, and Alan hides his relief, because watching them fight 2 boars at once still has him sweating bullets. Granville mentions that leaves 17 more to go this year, but Alan quickly clarifies that it's actually just 10 more. After all, 7 boars had already been hunted this year before he graced them with his presence, so they'll have filled the quota by this time next month for sure. The Baron is clearly impressed by this, and now Xenoph is sure that his knights won't be needed after all. Alan then tells the Baron that they actually have 2 requests to make of him. For starters, they want to ask for permission to make 2 more of the shield walls. Granvelle assumes that it's in the interest of hunting even more next year, so he has no problem allowing it. Alan then tells him that for their second request, they would like to procure goods not available in the village, specifically liquor. They want his permission to trade in liquor and allow its distribution among the serfs. Because as more and more boars are hunted, there is a real concern that the resulting abundance of meat will reduce its value in the village. Exchanging the meat for imported liquor instead will help to prevent a market crash. The Baron asks him why they want it to be liquor specifically, and Alan explains that, given his position, this is something that Xenoph might understand better. The hunters must risk their lives to be effective after all. Xenoph quickly understands that he needs the liquor to help keep their morale high during the hunts. Alan confirms this, saying that that's how his father explained it to him. Xenoph then tells the Baron that he thinks that their request stands to very good reason. Granvelle decides to consider it favorably, and he tells Alan that he has done a splendid job today. Before they leave though, when Cecil finally wakes up, she warns Alan that he was lucky to get any praise from her father, but he shouldn't let it get to his head. She almost falls from her horse while she complains about him, but Sebas quickly catches her and asks her to be careful. Cecil certainly doesn't give the impression of a delicate damsel, and Alan is pretty sure this is probably the last he sees of her. However, he actually sees her again when he goes to the Baron's residence with his father and Gerda. Granvelle tells them that they've truly shown him what they're capable of, so he must commend their amazing hunting skills. Their accomplishments deserve to be rewarded, because he wouldn't make a good Baron otherwise. That takes both Rodin and Gerda by surprise, but this is exactly what Alan was waiting for. He hopes the Baron doesn't bother with money, because they want the social mobility of a commoner. Just as he was hoping for, Granvelle informs them that he hereby elevates them and their families to commoner status. After their initial surprise, Rodin, Gerda, and Alan thank him for his decision, though Alan is the happiest out of them, because that means he can go hunting outside the village limits. He has dreamed about this moment countless times over the past 8 years, and his first stop will be the White Dragon Mountains, because he wants to go dragon hunting. Granvelle mentions that he will also grant the same status to any serfs who have taken part in the hunts for over 10 years. They must do a thorough check and determine who among their team is eligible. Since he foresees no problems fulfilling the king's order, he can now return to the city and rest easy. Sebas then reminds him that there was one more thing the king was keen to know. Granvelle remembers that detail and tells them that the king wishes to promote Krina village as a shining example for the rest of the kingdom. That's why he asked him for the details of how the boar hunts began, wanting to know the history behind it. Alan is a little lost because he hasn't heard that story himself, but Gerda intervenes and clarifies that that's actually a sore subject for Rodin, so he'll tell it in his stead. Granvelle doesn't have an issue with this, so Gerda tells him that it all started in spring, 13 years ago. About 100 serfs from nearby villages relocated here to help develop the land as part of the reclamation decree. After 6 months of hard work, they had cleared out a good chunk of the forest, but fall was on the horizon when disaster struck. A great boar came out of nowhere and attacked them, devouring most of the wheat and potatoes that they had set aside for winter. The majority of serfs had chosen to brave the frontier after struggling to obtain food in their old villages, which meant going back wasn't an option. That's when Rodin spoke up, and he proposed they hunt the boars for meat. Back then, they didn't have any of the weapons, armor, or knowledge that they do now. In spite of that, all the men united to go hunting with pickaxes and hoes as weapons, and they managed to kill a single boar. Granvelle mentions that that sounds like a story to pride themselves on, because they came together to accomplish a difficult task. Gerda tells him that the problem is that they lost a friend in the process. After defeating the boar, they overcame a trial of the gods, and their injuries were healed, but their friend wasn't as fortunate. He has told Rodin over and over again that he shouldn't blame himself, but he just won't hear it. When Alan hears that story, he instantly understands why his father covered for that commoner back then. He risked his own life because he once lost a friend the same way. Granvelle apologizes for dredging up such a painful memory, but he tells Rodin that even though lives were lost, the village could have never come this far without his prudent actions. That's why he wants to honor the bravery of his youth with one more reward, so he'll allow him to ask of him whatever he wants. Alan gets really excited for the bonus event, so he encourages his father to ask for some liquor. However, Rodin has only one request in mind, and without hesitation, he asks the Baron to allow his son to work at his estate. He explains that Alan has a better head on his shoulders than he does, so any job is fine, even just hallboy. Alan clearly wasn't expecting that, and it isn't what he had in mind because it could totally ruin everything. The Baron decides to think about it though, and Sebas tells him that he has no problems with it, since Alan seems pretty clever to him. Alan internally panics and begs him to say no, because he wants to live his dream of hunting legendary dragons. He'll have even less freedom living with the Baron, so he must find a way out of this situation. Granvelle mentions that a hallboy won't do, so he decides to hereby appoint Alan as manservant of the Granvelle family. Cecil immediately complains about his decision, saying that just the idea of having a serf in their house makes her sick. Sebas reminds her that he's a commoner now, while Alan doesn't know what the difference between hallboy and manservant is. Rodin looks extremely happy though, to the point he starts crying, so Alan has no choice but to accept his new position. Soon after that, Teresia helps him with the preparations before he leaves the village. Krina looks a little sad to know that he's leaving, so Alan decides to have one more duel with her. Of course, Krina gladly agrees, but everyone is surprised that Alan is actually overpowering her this time. Alan used all the magic stones that he had stocked up and created 20 copies of Hawkins to go all in on agility. When Krina turns 12, she'll leave to study in Academy City, and then she'll go into the royal service. It's possible they'll never see each each other again, so he wants to give it his all in this last duel. In no time, Alan manages to tie for the first time and tells Krina that they'll settle this in the future when they meet again. Krina is a little surprised at first, but she gladly accepts the offer, saying that she's going to win for sure. Alan finally sees the smile he wanted to see, so he decides to say goodbye to everyone, including Dagora, who reluctantly gives him a dagger as a farewell gift. Everyone is sad to see him go, but Rodan tells him that manservant is only the first step for him, so he has to work hard to go places. Teresia, on the other hand, simply asks him to come back home if it gets too hard. With that, Alan finally says goodbye to his parents and leaves with the Baron, officially leaving his home village behind.